The sun was setting as Maya Johnson drove her small blue Honda along Maple Street. The 19-year-old pre-law student hummed along to music, tired but happy after finishing her exams. Her dark curly hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore her university sweatshirt, thinking about the dinner waiting at home. Red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Maya's stomach dropped. She hadn't been speeding. Her taillight wasn't broken. She'd come to a complete stop at the intersection back there. Still, she knew what to do. Her parents had prepared her for this moment since she got her license. She pulled over carefully, turned off the music, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. Officer Richard Dawson watched the Honda pull over. He'd been parked at the corner of Maple and Pine for 2 hours, and it had been a slow day. He noticed the car earlier. A young black girl driving through Lakeside Heights, an area where most residents were white and wealthy. That was enough to make him curious. He approached the driver's side window, one hand resting on his holster. "License and registration," he said, not bothering with hello. "Good evening, officer," Maya said politely, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Dawson's face hardened. "License and registration first." "Of course." Maya reached slowly for her glove compartment, narrating her movements. "I'm just getting my registration from the glove compartment." She handed over the documents with both hands. Dawson studied her license. Maya Johnson. Address: 742 Oakwood Drive, one of the biggest houses in Lakeside Heights. His eyebrows rose slightly. "You live on Oakwood?" he asked, suspicion clear in his voice. "Yes, sir. About 3 miles from here. I'm heading home from university." Dawson looked from the license to Maya, then back to the license. "This your car?" "Yes, sir. It was a gift from my parents when I started college." "Pretty nice gift," he said, his tone suggesting he didn't believe her. "You mind telling me what you're doing in this neighborhood?" Maya blinked, confused. "I'm going home, officer. This is the direct route from campus to my house." "Mum." Dawson walked slowly around her car, shining his flashlight through the windows. Maya sat perfectly still, trying to control her breathing. Her phone sat in the cup holder, and she wished she could call her dad. Dawson returned to her window. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "May I ask why, officer?" Maya's voice remained respectful but firm. "I think I smell something suspicious coming from your car." Maya knew there was nothing in her car. She was a straight-A student who had never even tried a cigarette, let alone anything illegal. But she also knew arguing would only make things worse. "I'm going to step out now," she said clearly, knowing his body camera would record this. As soon as she was out of the car, Dawson's demeanor changed. "Hands against the vehicle," he ordered. "Officer, I don't understand what I've done wrong," Maya said, placing her palms on the roof of her Honda. "You know, you people always think you can talk your way out of things," Dawson muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Maya froze. "Excuse me? What do you mean by you people?" That was all it took. "Don't get smart with me," Dawson snapped, pulling her hands behind her back and clicking handcuffs around her wrists. "You're being detained for suspected possession." "This is racial profiling," Maya said clearly, making sure the body camera caught her words. "I've done nothing wrong." Dawson laughed. "Let me guess, you're going to tell me your daddy's a lawyer or something, right?" Maya looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "No," she said quietly. "My father is an FBI agent." Dawson laughed again, louder this time, as he guided her toward the patrol car. "Sure he is," he said, opening the back door. "And I'm the president." As Maya was placed in the back seat, she kept her composure. Her father had always told her that in situations like this, patience and documentation were her best weapons. Dawson had no idea what was coming for him. The inside of the police car smelled like old coffee and pine air freshener. Maya sat with her back straight, despite the uncomfortable position the handcuffs forced her into. Through the window, she watched Officer Dawson circle her Honda, opening doors and rifling through her belongings. He won't find anything, she thought. Her school backpack contained only textbooks, notebooks, and a half-eaten granola bar. The trunk held a gym bag and a blanket for emergencies. Maya had never even gotten a parking ticket before. 2 more police cars pulled up, lights flashing silently. Maya's heart sank. 3 officers for 1 college student. The neighbors would be peering through their curtains by now. What a scene they were making over nothing. Officer Chen stepped out of one car, Officer Rodriguez from the other. They approached Dawson, who was now holding Maya's backpack. "What have we got?" asked Rodriguez. "Suspicious vehicle in the neighborhood. Driver gave me attitude." Dawson jerked his head toward the police car where Maya sat. "Says her daddy's FBI." Chen and Rodriguez exchanged glances. "You find anything?" Chen asked, looking at the backpack. "Nothing yet, just school stuff." Dawson sounded disappointed. "But I know these types. They think they're above the law." Rodriguez frowned slightly. "These types?" Dawson ignored the question. "I'm gonna run her name through the system. Watch her." As Dawson walked back to his car, Rodriguez approached the window where Maya sat. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked. "No, I'm not okay," Maya replied calmly. "I've been handcuffed and placed in a police car for driving home from college. Officer Dawson hasn't told me what law I've broken." Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "He said you were suspicious." "Being black in Lakeside Heights isn't a crime, officer," Maya said. "I live 3 miles from here. My family has lived in this town for 12 years. Before Rodriguez could respond, Dawson returned, looking frustrated. Maya guessed her clean record had disappointed him. "I'd like to make my phone call now," she said when Dawson opened the door. "This isn't TV," Dawson scoffed. "You're not under arrest yet." "Yet?" Maya raised an eyebrow. "So you're planning to arrest me even though you found nothing illegal?" "Watch your tone," Dawson warned. "I know my rights, officer. I'm a pre-law student at State University. If I'm being detained, I have the right to contact someone." Dawson's face darkened, but Officer Chen stepped forward. "Just let her make the call, Rich. What's the harm?" With visible reluctance, Dawson held Maya's phone up. "Who are you calling?" "My father," Maya answered. "Fine. I'll dial for you since you're cuffed. What's the number?" Maya recited it from memory, watching Dawson's fingers punch the numbers. He put the phone on speaker and held it near her. 3 rings, then a deep voice answered. "Thomas Johnson." "Dad, it's Maya," she said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of tension that her father would recognize instantly. "I've been pulled over and detained by Officer Dawson on Maple Street, near the intersection with Pine." "Are you hurt?" Her father's voice remained calm, but Maya could hear the immediate shift to professional mode. "No, but I'm handcuffed in the back of a police car. They haven't found anything because there's nothing to find." Dawson grabbed the phone back. "Mr. Johnson, this is Officer Richard Dawson. Your daughter was exhibiting suspicious behavior." "This is Special Agent Thomas Johnson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation," her father interrupted, his voice now cool and official. "Badge number 27,591, Civil Rights Division. I'm recording this call. Please state your full name, badge number, and the specific reason my daughter is being detained." The color drained from Dawson's face. His hand holding the phone trembled slightly. For the first time, he seemed at a loss for words. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Agent Johnson continued. "I expect my daughter to be treated with respect until I arrive. Do not question her further without legal representation present." The call ended. Dawson stared at the phone as if it had burned him. Officer Chen cleared his throat. "Rich, maybe we should call the lieutenant." But Officer Dawson wasn't listening. He was looking at Maya now, really seeing her for the first time, not as a stereotype, but as someone with connections, someone with power, someone who could destroy his career. And from the back seat of the police car, Maya held his gaze steadily, without fear. The next 12 minutes passed in tense silence. Officer Dawson had retreated to his patrol car, furiously typing on his laptop, probably searching for information on Agent Thomas Johnson. Officers Chen and Rodriguez stood by Maya's Honda, speaking in low voices and occasionally glancing her way. Maya closed her eyes and took deep breaths. Her wrists hurt from the handcuffs, but she refused to complain. She thought about what her dad always told her. In moments of injustice, your dignity is your armor. Right now, her dignity was all she had. A call crackled over the radio. Maya couldn't hear the words, but she saw Officer Chen's posture change immediately. He walked quickly to Dawson's car and leaned down to the window. More urgent conversation. Dawson's face, visible in the side mirror, grew increasingly pale. 5 minutes later, a black unmarked SUV with government plates turned onto Maple Street and pulled up behind the police cars. The neighborhood had grown dark, but the flashing lights from the patrol cars illuminated the scene in pulses of red and blue. The SUV's door opened, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out. Even from a distance, Maya felt relief wash over her. Her father moved with purpose, his badge already in his hand as he approached the officers. Officer Rodriguez straightened his uniform nervously. Officer Chen stepped forward to meet Agent Johnson. Dawson remained in his car for several seconds before finally emerging, looking like a man walking to his own execution. Special Agent Thomas Johnson, her father introduced himself, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. 20 years at the FBI had taught him that real authority didn't require shouting. "I'm here for my daughter." "Of course, sir," Chen said quickly. "There's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Agent Johnson repeated, his tone making the words sound dangerous. "May I see your body camera footage, officers?" Chen and Rodriguez exchanged glances. Dawson stepped forward, finding his voice at last. "Sir, we were conducting a routine patrol when we observed." "I didn't ask for your interpretation of events, Officer Dawson," Agent Johnson cut him off. "I asked for the body camera footage, and I'd like my daughter released from those handcuffs immediately." "Yes, sir," Rodriguez said, moving toward the police car where Maya sat. Agent Johnson followed, his eyes meeting Maya's through the window. The slight nod he gave her carried a world of meaning, pride in her composure, anger at the situation, reassurance that things would be handled. Rodriguez opened the door and helped Maya out, quickly removing the handcuffs. She rubbed her wrists, relief flooding through her arms as blood circulation returned. "Are you all right?" her father asked quietly as she stepped beside him. "I'm fine, Dad," she answered, straightening her shoulders. Agent Johnson turned to the three officers. "I want to see Lieutenant Walsh." "Now." "He's already on his way, sir," Chen said. "He asked us to bring everyone to the station." "Good," Agent Johnson replied. "Maya's car stays here. She'll ride with me. And I want copies of all body camera footage preserved immediately. Is that understood?" The officers nodded. Dawson looked like he might be sick. As they walked to the SUV, Maya felt her father's gentle hand on her shoulder. Only then did she allow herself to tremble slightly. "You did everything right," he told her quietly as he opened the passenger door. "I'm so proud of you." Inside the car, away from the officer's eyes, Maya finally let her guard down. Her hands shook as she fastened her seatbelt. "I was scared, Dad," she admitted. "Not because I thought they'd hurt me, but because, for a minute there, I wasn't a person to him. I was just a category." Her father's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I know, sweetheart. And that's exactly why we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again." As they drove toward the police station, Maya watched the patrol cars follow behind them. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Officer Dawson had thought he was teaching her a lesson about staying in her place. Instead, he was about to learn one himself. "This isn't just about me, is it?" Maya asked as they stopped at a red light. Her father glanced at her, his expression both sad and determined. "No, it never is." The police station buzzed with unusual energy when Maya and her father walked in. Word had spread fast. Officers at desks pretended to focus on paperwork, but their eyes followed the tall FBI agent and his daughter as they crossed the lobby. Lieutenant Walsh was waiting for them, his face a careful mask of professional concern. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and deep lines around his eyes. "Agent Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "As do I," Maya's father replied, his handshake brief but firm. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" "Of course. Please follow me." They were led to a conference room at the back of the station. The room was plain but spacious, with a long table and uncomfortable-looking chairs. A large screen hung on one wall. "Officer Dawson and the others will join us shortly," Walsh explained. "Our tech is downloading the body camera footage now." Maya sat next to her father, still wearing her university sweatshirt, looking younger than her 19 years under the harsh fluorescent lights. But her eyes were sharp and observant, taking in every detail. "While we wait," Agent Johnson said, "I'd like to see Officer Dawson's record." Lieutenant Walsh hesitated. That would require a formal request through proper channels. "Lieutenant," Maya's father cut in, his voice remaining even. "I could make that formal request. Or I could call my supervisor at the Civil Rights Division, who would then call your commissioner. Either way, I'll have that information by morning. Let's not waste time." The lieutenant studied Agent Johnson's face, then nodded slowly. "I'll get the file." When the door closed behind him, Maya turned to her father. "You think this isn't Dawson's first time, don't you?" "People develop patterns," he answered simply, "especially when those patterns go unchallenged." 5 minutes later, the door opened again. Lieutenant Walsh returned with a folder, followed by Officers Dawson, Chen, and Rodriguez. The department's legal counsel, a nervous-looking woman with glasses, hurried in behind them. "Ms. Harris will be sitting in," Walsh explained, nodding toward the lawyer. "Standard procedure." "Of course," Agent Johnson said, his attention already on the folder Walsh had placed before him. Officer Dawson took a seat directly across from Maya, but couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the table, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Officers Chen and Rodriguez sat further down, looking uncomfortable. "The footage is ready," Walsh announced, picking up a remote control and turning on the screen. What followed was 20 minutes of video from Officer Dawson's body camera. It showed everything: the unnecessary stop, the condescending tone, the unfounded accusation, the handcuffs. When the video captured Dawson's "You people" comment, Ms. Harris scribbled something urgently on her notepad and slid it to Lieutenant Walsh. Throughout the viewing, Maya's father remained completely still, his face betraying no emotion. Only Maya noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. When the video ended, the room fell silent. "Officer Dawson," Lieutenant Walsh finally said, "do you have anything to say?" Dawson cleared his throat. "I was following standard procedure for suspicious." "What was suspicious about my daughter's vehicle or behavior?" Agent Johnson interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. That neighborhood has had break-ins recently, and by college students driving home at 6 p.m. Maya's father asked, "Or was it something else about my daughter that made her seem suspicious to you?" The question hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew exactly what he was asking. Officer Dawson swallowed hard. "I was just doing my job." "No," Agent Johnson said, finally opening the folder Walsh had given him. "You were doing something quite different from your job, Officer Dawson, and according to these records, it's not the first time." He laid out 3 complaint forms on the table. 3 formal complaints of racial profiling in the past 18 months, all dismissed after internal review. He looked up at Lieutenant Walsh. "Were you part of those reviews, Lieutenant?" Walsh's face reddened. "Yes, sir." "And Ms. Harris," Agent Johnson turned to the lawyer, "were you aware of this pattern when you came in today?" The lawyer pushed her glasses up nervously. "I've only just been assigned to this case." "It's not a case yet," Agent Johnson said, his words falling like stones in the quiet room. "But it will be." The room grew tense after Agent Johnson's words. Ms. Harris whispered something to Lieutenant Walsh, who nodded grimly. "Agent Johnson," Walsh said carefully, "I understand your concern as a father." "I'm not speaking as a father right now, Lieutenant," Agent Johnson replied. "I'm speaking as a federal agent who has spent 20 years investigating civil rights violations. What happened to my daughter today is part of a larger problem." He spread the complaint forms on the table, pointing to dates and details. 3 similar complaints, all dismissed. How many others weren't formally reported? How many people without FBI connections just accepted this treatment? Officer Dawson stared at his hands, his face ashen. Officers Chen and Rodriguez exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We take all complaints seriously," Lieutenant Walsh insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then you'll take this one seriously too," Agent Johnson said. He pulled out his phone and pressed a few buttons. "I've just emailed my division chief. By tomorrow morning, we'll have authorization to review every stop, search, and arrest Officer Dawson has conducted in the past 2 years. Dawson's head snapped up. You can't do that. We can and we will, Agent Johnson replied calmly. Federal oversight exists precisely for situations like this. Ms. Harris leaned forward. Perhaps we could discuss a resolution that doesn't require federal involvement. I'm listening, Agent Johnson said. Maya watched the faces around the table, seeing fear, defensiveness, and in some, growing realization. She'd studied cases like this in her pre-law classes, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different. Walsh cleared his throat. Officer Dawson will be placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Conducted by whom? Agent Johnson asked. We could bring in an independent investigator, Walsh suggested, from outside the department. Agent Johnson nodded slowly. That's a start. I'd also want a full review of your complaint process. 3 dismissed complaints against the same officer suggests a systematic problem. Walsh's face tightened, but he nodded. We can arrange that. And department-wide training on racial profiling, Agent Johnson added, within 30 days. Ms. Harris scribbled notes rapidly. These terms are unusual for a case that hasn't even been filed yet. Consider it preventative, Agent Johnson replied. Because I promise you if I file a federal case, it won't just be Officer Dawson under scrutiny. The implied threat hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew what a federal civil rights investigation could do to a police department, to careers, to reputations, to the community's trust. Walsh looked at the complaint forms again, then at Maya, who sat quietly beside her father. For the first time, he seemed to truly see her, not just as Agent Johnson's daughter or a potential lawsuit, but as a young woman whose rights had been violated. Ms. Johnson, he said directly to Maya, on behalf of this department, I apologize for how you were treated today. Maya hadn't expected this. She glanced at her father, who gave her a subtle nod. This was her moment to respond. Thank you, Lieutenant, she said carefully. But I'm not the only one who deserves that apology. What about the 3 people who filed these complaints? What about others who might have been afraid to speak up? A heavy silence followed her words. She's right, Officer Rodriguez said suddenly, surprising everyone. We've all seen it happen. Maybe not always with Dawson, but we've seen it. Dawson shot him a betrayed look, but Rodriguez continued. If we're going to wear these badges, we need to do better. All of us. Ken nodded slowly in agreement. Lieutenant Walsh looked from officer to officer, then back to Agent Johnson. We'll implement all the changes you've suggested, and more. This stops now. For the first time since they'd entered the station, Agent Johnson's stern expression softened slightly. That's good to hear, Lieutenant, because my daughter shouldn't have to fear the people sworn to protect her. Maya felt something shift in the room, a sense that perhaps, just maybe, real change might come from this terrible day. Not just policy changes or training sessions, but a genuine reckoning with uncomfortable truths. Officer Dawson's eyes remained fixed on the table, his career and reputation crumbling before him, while around him, the first steps toward accountability were taking shape. 1 week later, Maya sat in the back row of a packed community center. The emergency town hall meeting had been called after news of her incident spread throughout Lakeside Heights. Despite the short notice, the room was filled with concerned residents. At the front table sat Lieutenant Walsh, the police commissioner, the mayor, and 2 community leaders. Officer Dawson was notably absent, still on administrative leave pending investigation. This was not an isolated incident, a middle-aged woman was saying at the microphone. My son was stopped 3 times in 1 month driving home from his night shift. 3 times, same route, same time, different officers. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Maya noticed her father standing against the wall, watching everything carefully. He wasn't there in an official capacity tonight, just as a resident, a father, and a witness. The mayor, a nervous man with thinning hair, adjusted his tie. We take these concerns very seriously. That's why we've invited everyone here tonight, to listen and to share the changes we're implementing. Lieutenant Walsh stood up next. As many of you know, an incident last week brought several issues to our attention. We've begun a thorough review of our policies and practices. He outlined the changes, mandatory bias training for all officers, community oversight of complaint investigations, body camera reviews by an independent panel, and regular public reporting of stop and search statistics broken down by race and neighborhood. Maya listened carefully. The changes sounded promising, but she'd learned enough in her pre-law classes to know that policies were only as good as their implementation. A tall young man took the microphone next. "That all sounds nice, but Officer Dawson has had complaints before. Nothing happened then. Why should we believe anything will change now?" The police commissioner leaned forward. "What's different this time is accountability. We've brought in an outside investigator to review not just Officer Dawson's actions, but our entire complaint process." He didn't mention the FBI's involvement, but his eyes briefly flickered toward Agent Johnson. "And what about Officer Dawson?" someone called out. The commissioner hesitated. "I can't discuss personnel matters in detail, but I can tell you that the investigation is thorough and the consequences will reflect our findings." More questions followed, some angry, some thoughtful. Maya watched the faces in the crowd, her neighbors, her community. Some looked skeptical, others hopeful. A few shared stories similar to hers. After nearly 2 hours, the meeting began to wind down. The mayor made closing remarks, promising this wouldn't be the last conversation, but the first of many. As people filed out, Maya felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Officer Rodriguez standing there, not in uniform, but in regular clothes. "Ms. Johnson," he said quietly, "I wanted to tell you something." Maya nodded, waiting. After what happened, he seemed to search for the right words. "I requested a transfer to community outreach. I want to be part of fixing this, not part of the problem." Maya hadn't expected this. That's good to hear. "Your father is a good man," Rodriguez continued. "What he said in that room last week, about badges and responsibility, it made a lot of us think." Before Maya could respond, her father joined them, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Officer Rodriguez," he acknowledged with a nod. "Not on duty, sir. Just talking with your daughter about some changes happening at the department." Agent Johnson's expression softened slightly. "Change is needed, but it takes people willing to lead it from within." Rodriguez nodded. "That's what I'm trying to do now." After Rodriguez left, Maya and her father walked to their car in the cool evening air. "Do you think it'll really change anything?" Maya asked. "All those new policies and training sessions." Her father was quiet for a moment. "Policies are tools, Maya. They're only as effective as the people implementing them. But yes, I think some things will change, because enough people in that room tonight want them to." As they drove home, Maya thought about everything that had happened since that traffic stop. One terrible moment had sparked something larger, painful, yes, but also necessary. "You know," her father said as they turned onto their street, "I've been doing this work for 20 years. Sometimes it feels like pushing a boulder uphill, but nights like tonight remind me why it matters." Maya looked at her father, her hero, her protector, her example. "Because every step forward counts," she finished for him. He smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Exactly. 3 months later, Maya stood at the back of the police academy training room, watching 25 new recruits listen intently to her father. The morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting the earnest faces of young men and women who would soon wear the badge. "The power you'll hold isn't just in your weapon or your authority to arrest," Agent Johnson was saying. "It's in your everyday decisions, who you stop, who you question, who you believe." Maya had heard her father give variations of this talk before, but today felt different. Today, she would speak too. After the incident with Officer Dawson, a lot had changed. The independent investigation had concluded 2 months ago, resulting in Dawson's termination from the force. The 3 previous complaints against him were reopened and found valid. The department had issued public apologies to all involved. But more importantly, the Lakeside Heights Police Department had become an unexpected model for reform. Their new policies and training programs were being studied by neighboring communities. Lieutenant Walsh, to everyone's surprise, had become a vocal advocate for change, speaking candidly about the wake-up call the department had needed. Maya checked her notes one last time. As part of her summer internship at the Civil Rights Legal Clinic, she'd developed a presentation about bias in policing, not from statistics or textbooks, but from lived experience. "I'd like to introduce someone special," her father said, gesturing toward Maya. "My daughter isn't just a victim of racial profiling, she's a future lawyer who's turning that experience into action." Maya walked to the front of the room, suddenly aware of all the eyes on her. Some of the recruits looked curious, others uncomfortable. Good, she thought. Discomfort often preceded growth. 3 months ago, I was handcuffed in the back of a police car for driving home from college, she began quietly. The officer who stopped me didn't see a pre-law student with a clean record. He saw a young black woman in an expensive car in a white neighborhood, and he made assumptions. She paused, making eye contact with several recruits before continuing. "I was lucky. My father's position meant I had protection many others don't. But that experience changed my life, and not just in negative ways." Maya described how the incident had focused her studies, how she'd joined the Civil Rights Legal Clinic earlier than planned, how she'd helped draft some of the new policies now in place. "The hardest lesson wasn't that bias exists," she told the attentive recruits. "I already knew that. The hardest part was seeing how systems protect that bias until something forces change." From the side of the room, Maya noticed Lieutenant Walsh nodding slightly. He attended every one of these training sessions now, leading by example. "You'll make hundreds of split-second decisions in your careers," Maya continued. "In those moments, you won't have time to check your bias. You have to do that work now, before you ever put on the uniform." After the presentation, several recruits approached with questions. One young woman waited until the others had finished. "That took courage," she said quietly to Maya, "sharing your story like that." Maya smiled. "Sometimes that's what it takes." Outside in the parking lot, Maya and her father walked toward their cars. "You did good in there," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Think it makes any difference?" she asked. Her father looked back at the academy building. "Every mind we change matters. Every policy we improve matters." Maya nodded, unlocking her car, the same blue Honda from that fateful day. "I got accepted to that summer program at Georgetown Law, by the way. The one focused on police reform." Her father's face broke into a wide smile. "That's wonderful news." "They were particularly interested in my personal experience with their case study," Maya said with a hint of irony. "The case study?" "The Lakeside Heights reforms. Apparently, we're becoming famous in legal circles." Her father laughed softly. "From handcuffs to case study in 3 months. Not how I would have chosen for you to make your mark, but maybe it's exactly what was needed," Maya finished, sliding into her driver's seat. "See you at home, Dad." As she drove away from the police academy, Maya thought about the journey of the past 3 months, from victim to advocate, from anger to action. Officer Dawson had thought he was teaching her a lesson that day. He never imagined the lesson would spread so far, changing not just one officer or one department, but potentially many. Some good had come from that terrible day after all, not because of what had happened to her, but because of what she and others had chosen to do about it.